Well, thank you for joining us this afternoon, Chairman Cole, now Chairman of the House Appropriations Committee, and a champion of investment in Alzheimer's research now for 10 years plus. So you have been really the foremost champion on the House side.
Well, thank you.
Over those years, working with Roy Blunt in the Senate.
Very close.
The two of you drove this whole effort starting back in 2010, 2012. So thank you for spending some time. A member of the Chickasaw tribe, first indigenous American in this position.
Yes, and as chairman of the Full Appropriations Committee.
So we will talk a little bit about making sure that we get these new drugs to everybody in the country, which is a bit of a challenge with the Native Americans. So we will come back to that. So I just want to understand, I think all of the people listening, this will be a couple thousand people that will listen to this. What is driving these investments? What's the thinking behind the increase in investments that you've been driving over the years?
Well, first, like is the case with so many Alzheimer's advocates, I had the opportunity to see this disease up close. I lost my father to Alzheimer's. We began to notice in '82 something was wrong, and by '84 we had a diagnosis. My mother's like a lot of caregivers. She wanted to keep Dad home as long as she could. She did. But by '88, it was dangerous for him and for her. And my brother and I had to do a sort of family intervention. And then we had to take my dad, who was a career military guy, to a veterans center and he spent the last 12 years of his life there in Alzheimer's units, actually in 2 different ones. And the last 11, honestly, he didn't know any of us. So, I've seen what so many families go through. And I always swore if I had the opportunity to do something, we'd do something. When I got to Congress and had the opportunity to go on what's called the Labor, Health, and Human Services and Education Subcommittee, which has jurisdiction over the National Institutes of Health, I thought finally had my opportunity. And of course, partly by Alzheimer's advocacies and just interest and the great staff and working with the people out at NIH, Francis Collins was out there at that point. I learned it's our most expensive disease. So you could actually be for doing this. And, we spend close to $300 billion a year as a federal government looking after Alzheimer's patients. And of course, the projections are astronomical. If you could even delay the onset by about 5 years, you actually could save 42% of the money, not to even begin to count the human suffering and the tolls on families that this causes. So I thought, I'm in a position to finally do something. And Roy Blunt, a very good friend of mine, we were extremely close when he was in the House. He was chief whip on the Republican side. I was one of his deputies. We kept that working relationship. In fact, I helped talk him into becoming labor age chairman over there. He was originally headed for agriculture. And so we had this partnership, but I thought a couple of things. One, if we can get at this and start making major investments, and back then we were spending about $500 million a year. And this is not just on Alzheimer's, but dementia. And we're over $3.5 billion now. So we actually moved this up pretty dramatically in about a 7 or 8 year period. And we couldn't have done it, I must say, without Rosa DeLaura, who was my ranking member. That is the top Democrat on the committee when I was the Republican chair, and then we reversed roles 4 years later. And Patty Murray, who was now the chair of the Full Appropriations Committee and working with Roy Blunt. So we actually, this was a common thing we shared. This is not a partisan type issue. Obviously, it doesn't affect people that way. But we all thought we have a unique opportunity here, and we have differences of opinion. There's lots of controversy in what's called the Labor Age Bill. It's the second largest spending bill after defense. But here's a place we can work together. And here's a place I could justify it, to my Republican colleagues. You got to make the investment here because look how much money you're spending. And if we make progress, you're going to ultimately do a lot of good and do a lot of savings. I always tell advocates when they go to visit people, I said, now when you go to a Democratic office, just tell them this is just the right thing to do. They'll bankrupt the country to do the right thing. I said, oh my gosh. And I said, when you go to the Republican office, tell them this is the smart thing to do. You'll save money. Oh my God. But and so everybody's got a different appeal. But at the end of the day, the idea is to do both. These are really productive investments for us, and we're finally beginning to see, and it takes a while, money to, or the different drugs and things starting to come out that can lead to treatment. But I remember talking to Richard Hodis, was head of the institute that deals with Alzheimer's and dementia. A great guy, great scientist. And we did the first year, we increased, I think, research funding by about $300 million. It had been the largest increase in many years. And I called him up after we'd gotten it done and they'd had about a year. And I said, I know you probably can't answer this question, but can you tell me, did it make any difference? And he said, yeah, I can tell you right away, Congress. He said, research scientists are just like anybody else. They follow the money. And when you put that extra $300 million in, the number of applicants we got requesting research stuff went up by 28% in a single year. It's pretty dramatic. If you flag that this is important to the American people and we're willing to make an investment here, more science will come. I can't tell you which one of them will be a breakthrough or how it's going to work. I will just tell you, it's like anything else. The more activity that you're generating, then the more likelihood that we'll achieve something pretty fast. And the first sign is increased scientific focus and activity. So it was a good lesson, and we thought that was a good thing to continue.
When my wife passed away about 7 years ago, but she was a Democrat, I was a Republican. We used to go to offices and say we're the Alzheimer's party because the disease does not know Republicans or Democrats.
It certainly does.
And so it was. We had one piece of paper that showed the increase in government cost against what we were spending against it. So it basically was stimulated by your thinking and Roy's thinking about how to present this issue. And it works with Democrats too.
It really does.
It does.
And again, you look for things, and strangely enough, in this bill where there are lots of things where, again, these are legitimate disagreements, but I never had anybody come to me. I always tell my Republican friends this. Nobody's ever come to me in a town hall meeting and said, you guys are expending entirely too much money on Alzheimer's research. Or, gee, why are you wasting all that money to find a cure for cancer? What? These are actually things the American people want us to take resources and invest in because they see in their daily lives with their family or their friends what the consequences are, and they want to do something about it. It's exactly the same thing that motivates them to get involved, in the advocacy organizations and to write checks and contribute dollars. And pretty important when you're writing your own check. Or, I went to an Alzheimer's dinner once, and there were 1,500 people at it here in Washington, D.C. from every state in the union. And if you, at least the table I was at, and I suspect it was the same at the others, there were about the right proportions of Republicans and Democrats to elect, that would reflect the population. And you can immediately tell this is just not something that's partisan. This is something that's personal, but they want the government to be involved because we have enormous resources and we can focus them in ways that'll make a difference. And most of them had either already lost somebody or had somebody that was probably unlikely to benefit from the research, but they didn't want other people to go through what their families had gone through.
We did some polling last year when there was a dispute about whether Medicare should cover these new drugs, and half of the American voters, which is about 75 million people, reported that they either knew somebody in their family or a close friend with this disease. 25% said they'd been caregivers, had been or current caregivers of someone with Alzheimer's. So this is something the American people know in their gut, that's affected them. And to your point, they affect the family as well as the individual with the dementia. So,
well, I remember I actually used to be a pollster. I still own a piece of my old company, and we asked the question once, and people get interested in different diseases at different ages. Overall, cancer was always the number one because it was the most common. people over 50 were more concerned about Alzheimer's than they were about any other disease.
Yes.
And not that the other diseases aren't deadly and dangerous and awful, but they did not want to see people lose a sense of themselves and who they were. And again, they had a sort of innate sense of how difficult that would be as an individual and how awful it would be to watch somebody you love going through that kind of experience.
So you were central to the reauthorization of the National Alzheimer's Project Act, which occurred just a couple yesterday. So thank you for that, which extends this sort of notion of a national strategic investment in Alzheimer's to 2035. Curious, do you think you will continue to get the support of your colleagues?
I do. Again, strangely enough, again, this is we're living through an incredibly partisan and polarizing era in Congress. It's an area where actually you can create a productive political alliance because it's not a partisan objective. And this is one of those situations where the rain falls on the just and the unjust alike. We all deal with these sorts of things. We all watch other people struggle. And I've actually found, legislatively, and I talk constantly with my friends on the other side, what are the several things we can agree in that we can move something forward? And this tends to be, biomedical research, without a doubt, probably Alzheimer's more than any other, particularly for people over 50, really does move the needle. And people sit down and try to think of ways to work together instead of why I can't work with this other people because they're hopelessly misguided about whatever they disagree on. And I found it's a good thing. It's not only productive, but it helps Congress work.
Well, one of the great challenges going forward, and where I think a good deal of emphasis is going to be in the next 10-year period, is assuring that we have the right diagnostic tools and treatment pathways for all Americans. Because what most of the research has been done on white Caucasians and not in blacks or Latinos or indigenous Americans or Asians. And so one of the great challenges is making sure that we get these new medicines and the innovations that are coming to every American and not just those who are super able to pay or where the diagnostics and medicines don't work. So that is one of the goals that I hope we set for ourselves for 2035 as we think through the next 10-year goals, because you've done such a great job in getting us to 2025.
Well, happy to help. And again, a lot of people, have been part of that. But I would just encourage your viewers and listeners to remain active and go educate your members of Congress. Believe me, they want to hear from you, and this is something that you're going to get a good response on because you just hear about it and see it so much. And it's not something we need to fight on with one another on. It's something we can work together on.
Well, too much of America thinks there's nothing but fights in Washington, and there's so much that does happen on a bipartisan base that doesn't get the attention of the media. And this is one, and you've been a critical leader over the last dozen years on this. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you for your work, thank you for your championship, and thank you for carrying this forward.
Well, you're very kind to that. Thank you very much. Thanks for your advocacy. And I would just, again, tell your viewers, don't give up. We're moving in the right direction. This is a time to hit the accelerator, not the brakes.
Absolutely right. Great note to end on. Thank you.
Bet.
Take care.